I stood on a rusted balcony in Florence, holding a glass of cheap wine. The nightmare was finally over, and a life that felt like mine had begun. People ask how I ended up here, half a world away from the luxury I built. I tell them the short version. I just got divorced and moved abroad. My ex-husband immediately married his mistress. During the wedding, a guest said something that drove him crazy, and after that, he called me. Rewind to a room smelling of lemon polish and stale coffee. Marcus sat across the mahogany table, checking his Rolex every 30 seconds. He wasn't mourning our marriage, he was calculating traffic to his next appointment. It was probably a tasting for the wedding cake he was buying with the company funds I had earned. I signed my name on the dotted line, my hand steady despite the tremors in my chest. He didn't even look up as he grabbed his copy. "Doan?" he asked, already standing. I walked out and drove straight to the airport. I didn't go back to the house we designed. I didn't pack the designer dresses or the jewelry he bought to apologize for the nights he didn't come home. I had 2 suitcases filled with sketchbooks, and the few clothes that felt like me, not the doll he wanted. The heavy silence of the car ride was the first time I heard my own thoughts in a decade. Then, my phone buzzed on the passenger seat. It was a text from him. "Do you have the Netflix password? Chloe wants to watch something." I stared at the screen, the blue light stinging my tired eyes. He had just erased a decade of partnership, yet he still expected me to facilitate his entertainment. I didn't reply. I popped the SIM card out of the tray and dropped it into the gap between the seats. As the plane taxied down the runway, I felt the G-force push me back, pinning me down before finally lifting me up. Florence hit me with a wall of heat and the smell of roasting garlic. My new apartment was nothing like the pristine, climate-controlled mausoleum I had left behind. It was a 4th-floor walk-up with peeling ochre paint and shutters that refused to close properly. Dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight cutting through the room. I dragged my luggage up the narrow stone stairs, my muscles burning with a kind of pain that felt surprisingly good. This was real. This was heavy. This was mine. I opened the windows to let the noise of the street flood in. Scooters buzzed like angry wasps below, and shouting neighbors argued over laundry lines. It was chaotic and loud, the exact opposite of the suffocating silence Marcus required while he worked. I poured a glass of tap water and sat on the floor, surrounded by unopened bags. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for instructions or criticism. I closed my eyes and realized the silence in my head was actually peace. 3 months later, my bank account was bleeding dry, but my spirit was slowly clotting. I walked into Studio Vivaldi, a restoration firm tucked behind a leather market. The air smelled of cedar shavings and old varnish, a sharp contrast to the antiseptic bleach of Marcus's office. I sat across from Signor Rossi, a man with plaster dust permanently settled in his eyebrows. I didn't show him the skyscrapers I designed. I showed him sketches of arches. He offered me a junior draftsman role. The pay was insults wrapped in euros, but the anonymity was priceless. I spent my days measuring crumbling villas in the Tuscan hills, my boots covered in red mud. For the first time in a decade, nobody asked for my opinion on color palettes or budget cuts. I was just the American woman who brought the espresso and held the tape measure. It felt like hiding in plain sight. But my hands remembered things my mind tried to forget. During lunch breaks, I sat on the steps of the chaotic Piazza Santo Spirito with a sketchbook on my knees. My pen moved across the paper with a fluidity I hadn't felt since college. Marcus had always insisted on rigid kite renderings, claiming my hand-drawn lines looked unprofessional and messy. Here, the mess was the point. I drew the curve of a dome, the shadow of a gargoyle. The line wasn't shaking anymore. The architect inside me was waking up hungry. One rainy Tuesday, a crisis erupted at the Villa Moretti site. A 16th-century loggia was sagging, threatening to collapse the frescoed ceiling above. Rossi paced the wet terracotta floor, screaming at the structural engineer, who was wringing his hands. They were arguing about steel beams and external supports that would ruin the aesthetic. I stood in the corner, holding a wet umbrella, staring at the stress fractures radiating from the central column. I saw the vector lines clearly in my head. "It's not a compression issue," I said, my voice cutting through their shouting. Rossi stopped pacing and looked at me as if the furniture had suddenly spoken. I didn't apologize. I walked over to the makeshift table and grabbed a charcoal stick. On the back of a blueprint, I sketched a hidden cantilever system that transferred the load into the bedrock without touching the fresco. I shoved the paper toward the engineer. He squinted. Then his eyes went wide. Silence stretched tight in the damp room, until Rossi finally exhaled a cloud of smoke. He looked from the sketch to my face. Really seeing me for the first time, the dismissal in his eyes evaporated, replaced by a calculating respect. "You didn't learn that making coffee?" he grunted, tapping a thick finger on my drawing. He didn't fire me for overstepping. He put me in charge of the structural team. I walked home that evening feeling taller. Back in my apartment, the glow of victory dimmed when I opened Instagram. The algorithm, cruel and efficient, pushed a photo to the top of my feed. It was Marcus and Chloe. Her hand was thrust toward the camera, weighed down by a diamond the size of a grape. The caption read, "She deserves the world." I zoomed in on the stone. I knew that cut. I knew the price. And I knew exactly which corporate tax account he had drained to buy it. Marcus stared at the spreadsheet, the numbers blurring into a dull headache behind his eyes. The new assistant, a nervous girl named Sarah, stood by the door holding a stack of invoices like a shield. She tried to explain the discrepancy in the vendor accounts, referencing a color-coded system Juliana had implemented years ago. "I don't care how we used to do it," Marcus snapped, tossing his pen onto the glass desk. "Just fix it." When she hesitated, stammering about negative balances, he fired her on the spot. He needed solutions, not math. The office door swung open before the air could settle. Chloe breezed in, smelling of vanilla and entitlement, holding a glossy brochure for the St. Regis. She placed it directly over the past due notices on his desk. "The plaza is too cliché, Marcus," she purred, tracing his jawline with a manicured nail. "This ballroom has gold leaf on the ceiling. It's perfect." The deposit alone was more than the current payroll balance. He swallowed hard, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Whatever you want, babe. Book it." As she left to call the planner, Marcus logged into the corporate reserve account. The screen flashed a warning about restricted tax funds, but he bypassed it with a practiced click. He transferred the deposit, watching the balance drop into the danger zone. It was a temporary fix, he told himself. The upcoming merger with the Vance Group would replenish everything before the auditors noticed. He adjusted his cufflink, catching his reflection in the dark monitor. He looked successful. That was half the job, or so he hoped. The intercom buzzed, jarring him from his denial. It was Arthur Vance's executive assistant. Marcus picked up the phone, adopting his smoothest baritone. "Arthur, good to hear from you." But it wasn't Arthur. It was a cold, administrative voice asking about the revised blueprints for the Skyline project. "Mr. Vance feels the recent submissions lack vision," the voice said. "They seem derivative." Marcus gripped the receiver until his knuckles turned white. "Tell Arthur I'm personally refining the final touches." He lied. "He'll have brilliance by Monday morning." He hung up and pulled the blueprints from the flat file. He stared at the elevation drawings, waiting for inspiration to strike, but the lines remained static. For 10 years, Juliana had sat in the chair next to him, turning his vague concepts into structural realities while he handled the clients. He had convinced himself he was the genius and she was just the drafting hand. Now, staring at the blank spaces where load-bearing walls needed to be, he realized he didn't know the math to fill them. Desperation drove him to the closet where he kept the old hardware. He dug out Juliana's abandoned laptop, hoping to find unused sketches or templates he could repurpose. He booted it up, the fan whirring loudly in the quiet office. The desktop was clean, organized with her typical military precision. He clicked through the archive until he found a folder simply labeled Contingency. It sat there like a taunt. He double-clicked it, his heart hammering against his ribs, hoping for a lifeline to save the account. A password prompt appeared on the screen. He tried her birthday. Incorrect. He tried their anniversary. Incorrect. He tried the name of the first street they lived on. Access denied. She had locked him out long before she actually left. The realization that she had prepared for this scenario made his skin crawl. He wasn't just losing money, he was losing the game. Marcus slammed the laptop shut, the plastic casing cracking under his grip. He didn't need her files. He could charm his way out of the math. The scaffolding around Villa Moretti finally came down, revealing the restored limestone facade glowing in the Tuscan sunset. Rossi handed me a glass of Prosecco and pointed to the brass plaque mounted by the heavy oak doors. My name was etched there, right next to his architect J. Whitmore. It was the first time in 10 years my work bore my own signature. To the genius of structure, Rossi toasted, clinking his glass against mine. I drank the crisp wine, feeling the heavy cloak of invisibility finally slipping off my shoulders. The next morning, I sat at my usual table at Cafe Gilly, sketching a fountain design on a napkin. The shadow of a man fell across my paper, blocking the morning light. I looked up, expecting a tourist asking for directions, but froze. Arthur Vance stood there, wearing a bespoke suit that cost more than my apartment. He didn't look angry, he looked relieved. I thought the rumors were exaggerated, he said, pulling out a chair without asking. But you really are the one holding the pencil. I instinctively reached for my purse, my heart hammering against my ribs. I assumed Marcus had sent him to threaten me with a lawsuit for working elsewhere. I didn't steal any clients, Arthur, I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline. He laughed, a dry sound that startled a pigeon nearby. No, Juliana, you didn't steal anything. You just took the talent with you when you left. He signaled the waiter for an espresso. I'm not here for Marcus. I'm here to offer you a job directly. Arthur slid a folder across the marble table. Inside were the latest renderings from my old firm. They were flashy, expensive, and structurally impossible. He sent me these last week, Arthur said, tapping the glossy paper with disdain. He calls it visionary. I call it a lawsuit waiting to happen. I looked at the drawings. They were all style, no substance. Just like the marriage. I'm pulling my funding, Juliana. The Vance Group doesn't invest in empty suits. We invest in the architect. Does he know? I asked, pushing the disastrous drawings away. Arthur took a slow sip of his coffee. He knows I'm unhappy. He doesn't know I'm liquidating my position on Monday. He leaned in, his eyes gleaming with a shark's intelligence. I hear the wedding is this weekend. Very lavish. Gold leaf and imported orchids. He paused, letting the implication hang in the air between us. It's fascinating how quickly a man will spend money. He doesn't actually have to prove he hasn't lost anything. The realization hit me harder than the divorce papers ever did. For a decade, I believed I was the supporting beam, essential but hidden behind the drywall. But looking at Arthur, I understood the truth. I wasn't the support beam. I was the foundation. Without me, the house didn't just creak, it collapsed. Marcus wasn't a partner, he was a tenant who had finally been evicted. I picked up the pen I had been sketching with. It felt heavy, like a weapon I finally knew how to use. I'm not coming back to New York, I said, meeting his gaze. Arthur smiled, pulling a checkbook from his jacket pocket. I don't care where you live, Juliana. I care where the designs come from. He wrote a figure that looked less like a fee and more like a war chest. I'll be at the wedding, of course. I wouldn't miss the show. He slid the check over the table. Consider this a retainer. And consider the silence before I announce my departure. A wedding gift. The St. Regis ballroom smelled of lilies and desperate ambition. Marcus adjusted his tie, feeling the silk stick to his damp neck. Every crystal on the chandeliers represented a credit line he had maxed out that morning. The quartet played Vivaldi, a cruel reminder of the talent he had discarded. He checked his phone, praying for a transfer confirmation that never arrived. He smiled until his jaw ached, but his hands shook inside his pockets. The illusion was expensive, and the bill was finally due. Chloe swept into the holding room, a vision in custom lace and conflict-free diamonds. She didn't look at Marcus. She focused entirely on her reflection in the gilded mirror. The photographer needs 10 more minutes, she announced, smoothing a skirt that cost more than a luxury car. She was radiant, fueled by the victory of finally being the wife. Marcus tried to compliment her, but his throat clicked. She was the trophy he had won, and she was bleeding him dry. The reception began, a blur of handshakes and hollow laughter. Marcus worked the room like a politician, dodging questions about the delayed Skyline project. He spotted the bank's CFO and ordered a waiter to refill the man's champagne immediately. Expansion is going great? Marcus lied, clapping a potential investor on the back. We have big news coming Monday. He was selling a dream that had evaporated. He just needed to keep the balloon inflated for 6 more hours. One slip, and it burst. A waiter tapped Marcus on the shoulder, leaning in with a discreet whisper. Sir, the bar manager says the card on file was declined. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. He pulled out his personal card, linked to his emergency savings, and shoved it into the waiter's hand. Run this one. And don't mention it again. He glanced around, terrified someone had heard. Nearby, the ice sculpture of a swan was already melting, dripping water onto the pristine tablecloth. The double doors swung open, and the atmosphere shifted instantly. Arthur Vance walked in, not with a date, but with a predatory confidence that silenced the nearby tables. He wasn't on the final guest list, but security wouldn't dare stop a man worth billions. Marcus froze, his champagne turning to vinegar. Arthur scanned the room, his eyes landing on Marcus with a look that wasn't congratulatory. It was the look of a man coming to collect a debt. The shark had entered the pool. Marcus forced his legs to move, intercepting Arthur before he could reach the investors. "Arthur! What a surprise!" Marcus exclaimed, his voice cracking an octave too high. He went for a handshake, but Arthur kept his hands in his pockets. "I wouldn't miss it," Arthur said, his voice smooth and low. "I wanted to see what my money bought before I make my announcement." Marcus laughed nervously, trying to steer him away. "Let's get you a drink. We can talk business later." Arthur didn't move. He simply smiled, a cold expression that didn't reach his eyes. "I think I'll say a few words first," he said. Chloe tapped her glass with a spoon, signaling the start of the speeches. She grabbed the mic, beaming at the crowd. "I just want to thank everyone for celebrating our upgrade," she giggled, unaware of the man standing behind her husband. Marcus watched Arthur step forward. The executioner had arrived, and he was asking for the microphone. Chloe beamed, handing the microphone to Arthur as if offering a crown jewel. She clearly expected a speech about synergy and future millions, oblivious to the predator standing in her expensive spotlight. Marcus wanted to lunge across the table to stop it, but his legs felt encased in concrete. He gripped the edge of the tablecloth so hard his knuckles turned white. Watching the metal mesh of the microphone pass into Arthur's waiting hand, the room fell silent, the kind of heavy quiet that precedes a natural disaster. Arthur tapped the mic once. "Weddings are about truth," Arthur began, his voice amplified and crisp, bouncing off the gold leaf ceiling. He didn't look at the bride. His gaze was locked onto Marcus with terrifying intensity. "They are about revealing who we really are when the facade is stripped away." He swirled his champagne, the liquid catching the light like liquid gold. "I have known Marcus for 10 years. I watched him build a firm that redefined our city's skyline. Or rather, I watched the firm be built while Marcus stood in the foreground." A ripple of confused laughter moved through the crowd, guests uncertain if this was a roast or a tribute. Marcus felt sweat trickle down his spine, cold and itching. Arthur took a slow, deliberate step closer to the head table. "I just returned from Florence yesterday," he said casually, dropping the location like a bomb. "I had the pleasure of visiting a brilliant architect there. A woman whose fingerprints are on every successful building this firm has ever claimed." The laughter died instantly. Chloe's smile froze, cracking at the edges. "Juliana looks fantastic, by the way," Arthur continued, addressing the room but speaking only to Marcus. "She is thriving, and why wouldn't she be? She was the engine, the vision, and the mathematics behind the art." He paused, letting the name hang in the air, heavier than the centerpiece. "It was fascinating to review the recent portfolio Marcus submitted to my group. Without her correcting the load, bearing calculations, the designs were not just derivative. They were dangerous. It seems the talent left the building along with the wife." The investors at table 4 stopped eating, their forks hovering halfway to their mouths. Marcus saw the bank CFO pull out his phone, likely checking the terms of their loan. "Transparency is key in business and marriage," Arthur said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming deadly serious. "So, I feel obligated to announce that as of this morning, the Vance Group has liquidated its entire position in Marcus's firm." A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. The sound was sharp, sudden, and absolutely devastating. "The intellectual property is gone," Arthur announced, driving the final nail into the coffin. "The capital is withdrawn, and the man standing before you is effectively bankrupt." He gestured loosely with his glass toward the untouched wedding cake. "I hope you enjoyed the shrimp, everyone. It is likely the last thing this company will ever pay for." Marcus felt his vision blur at the edges. The room spun. The intricate web of lies he had spun for years had been torn down in less than 3 minutes. The aftermath was instantaneous and brutal. Smartphones appeared in hands like knives, cameras recording the meltdown for social media. The whispers started as a hum and grew into a roar of gossip. Marcus looked at his parents, seeing only shame in their eyes. He looked at his business partners, seeing only litigation. Then he turned to Chloe. The adoration that had been on her face moments ago was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating horror. She wasn't looking at her husband, she was looking at a liability. Chloe grabbed his arm, her nails digging into his bicep through the tuxedo fabric. "What is he talking about?" she hissed, her voice trembling with a mix of fury and panic. "Marcus, tell them he's lying. Tell them we're rich." Her eyes darted to the guests, then down to the massive diamond on her finger, realizing it might be zirconia. Marcus opened his mouth to spin a new lie, to promise a fix, but no sound came out. The silence from him was the only confirmation she needed. Arthur raised his glass one last time, a mock salute to the wreckage he had caused. "To the happy couple," he said, a cruel smile touching his lips. "I truly hope you married for love, Chloe. Because there is certainly no money left to keep you warm at night." He drank the champagne in one smooth swallow, set the glass on a passing waiter's tray, and walked out the double doors. He didn't look back. The exit was clean, surgical, and left a gaping wound in its wake. The band hesitated, unsure whether to play the next song, or pack up their instruments. Marcus stood alone in the center of the crowded room, isolated by the truth. The waiters were already clearing plates, sensing the party was over before the cake was cut. He needed a way out. He needed a lifeline. His hand went to his pocket, gripping his phone like a talisman. There was only one person who knew how to fix broken structures. He pushed past his sobbing bride and ran toward the bathroom. Marcus stumbled into the bridal suite bathroom, the heavy oak door muting the roar of the disaster outside. He fumbled with the lock, his hands slick with sweat, until the bolt clicked home. The silence in the marble room was sudden and terrifying. He stared at his reflection in the gilded mirror. His face was gray, his eyes wide and feral. He looked like a cornered animal, not a CEO. He needed a fix. He needed the one person who had fixed everything for 10 years. He pulled his phone from his pocket, the screen bright in the dim light. His thumb hovered over her contact. He hadn't deleted it. Deep down, he had kept it like a spare key, an emergency break glass in case of fire. Well, the house was burning down. He pressed call, lifting the device to his ear with a trembling hand. The ringback tone purred, a calm, rhythmic sound that contrasted violently with the pounding of his heart. "Pick up," he hissed. "Pick up, damn it." Thousands of miles away, the sun was setting over the Arno River. I was sitting on my terrace, watching the swallows dive around the Duomo. The air was cool, smelling of basil and exhaust. When my phone buzzed on the wrought iron table, I didn't jump. I looked at the screen, seeing the name that used to make my stomach clench. Marcus. It didn't bring fear anymore. It brought a strange, detached curiosity. It was like watching a natural history documentary about a predator that could no longer bite. I slid the green icon across the screen. "Hello, Marcus?" I said, my voice steady. He didn't say hello. He exploded. "You have to call him. You have to call Arthur right now and tell him it's a misunderstanding." His voice was high, thin, and laced with panic. "Tell him the designs are yours! Tell him you're still consulting for me. I can pay you whatever you want, Juliana. Just fix this." He was bargaining with currency he didn't have, trying to buy back a reputation he had already sold. I took a sip of wine, a dark Chianti that tasted like earth and history. "I can't do that," I said simply. "Arthur knows the truth. Everyone does." Marcus made a sound like a wounded dog. "You planned this," he screamed, the accusation distorted by the poor connection. "You set me up. You wanted to humiliate me in front of everyone." He was rewriting history in real time, casting himself as the victim of a grand conspiracy rather than the architect of his own failure. "I didn't plan anything, Marcus," I replied, watching a tour boat drift down the river below. "I just stopped lying for you. Gravity did the rest." On his end, I heard a loud thud, like a fist hitting a wall. "You owe me," he shouted. "I built this life for us. I made you who you are." The delusion was absolute. He truly believed his charisma was the foundation of the firm. Even as the roof collapsed on his head, it was almost impressive. "The password," he gasped, shifting tactics instantly. "Just give me the password to the contingency folder. I know you have backup files, old sketches. Something I can use to show the bank on Monday." Someone started pounding on the bathroom door on his end. I heard Chloe's voice, shrill and demanding, asking who he was talking to. "Go away," Marcus yelled at his new wife, then lowered his voice to a desperate whisper. "Juliana, please, just the password. I'm begging you." I felt a ghost of a smile touch my lips. He was worried about files. He was worried about sketches. He didn't realize the ground had vanished completely. The folder won't help you, Marcus, I said softly. The bank isn't your biggest problem right now. The pounding on his door got louder. What are you talking about? He snapped, the old arrogance flickering back to life for a second. I just need to stabilize the accounts. I can handle the rest. You can't handle the rent, I said. Arthur didn't just sell his shares. He sold the building your office is in. There was a long, heavy silence on the line. The pounding stopped. Even the static seemed to freeze. I bought the deed, Marcus. I own the building now. I swirled the wine in my glass. And I have different plans for that space. You'll receive the eviction notice on Monday morning. You have 30 days to vacate. I heard him breathing, shallow, ragged gasps like a man drowning in shallow water. He tried to speak, to beg, to threaten, but only a choked sob came out. Then my doorbell rang, a cheerful, bright sound that signaled dinner, not drama. I have to go, Marcus, I said, standing up and brushing a crumb from my lap. My pizza is here. I tapped the red button, ending the call, and the connection to my past, forever. The news cycles moved faster than the lawsuits. Within 2 months, the Whitmore Group was just a warning sign for investors. I heard Chloe filed for annulment before the ink was dry on the foreclosure notices. She took the diamonds, or what was left of them, and vanished into another socialite circle. Marcus didn't fight back. The video of his meltdown at the wedding had turned him into a meme, stripping away the one thing he valued more than money. His dignity was gone. 1 year later, the air in Florence was thick with jasmine and anticipation. I stood before the completed restoration of the Palazzo Vecchietti. It wasn't just a repair job, it was a resurrection. The ribbon cutting was scheduled for noon, but I arrived early to walk the halls alone. The stone floors were cool beneath my feet, echoing the sound of my confident steps. I wasn't carrying coffee for a boss anymore. I was the boss. The silence here wasn't empty, it was full. I ran my hand along the limestone archway I had sketched on a napkin that first terrified morning. It stood solid and graceful, holding up the ceiling without strain. For a decade, I believed I was the decorative trim in Marcus's life, fragile and easily replaced. I was wrong. I was the load-bearing wall. This building didn't need a filter or a marketing team to prove its worth. It stood because the math was honest. It stood because I had designed it. Arthur Vance found me near the atrium, holding a bottle of vintage champagne. It's a masterpiece, Juliana, he said, handing me a glass. He didn't offer advice or try to steer the vision. He just admired the work. I realized then how much energy I had wasted trying to shrink myself to fit into Marcus's pocket. I had dimmed my own light to keep him from feeling the dark. That woman was gone now. She stayed back in New York with the rubble. My assistant handed me the morning mail before the press arrived. On top of the stack was a heavy cream envelope with a New York postmark. It was an invitation to a bankruptcy auction. Assets of the former Whitmore estate. I looked at the item list. His desk, his chair, the broken laptop. It was a catalog of a life built on hollow ground. I didn't feel pity. I felt a profound, quiet indifference. I didn't even break the wax seal. I dropped the envelope into the recycling bin next to the door. It made a soft thud, the final sound of a heavy door closing forever. I adjusted my silk scarf and pushed open the heavy double doors. The Italian sun hit my face, warm and blindingly bright. Cameras flashed, but this time, they were waiting for me. I stepped out onto the piazza, not as a wife or a victim. I walked into the light as the architect of my own life.